What if I told you that one of the most respected mystics of the 20th century, a man called the Sleeping Prophet, once revealed that Adam and Eve were not the first humans? This isn't a theory invented on the internet, but a claim documented in Edgar Cayce's own readings during the 1930s. Imagine the weight of such a statement. If humanity existed before the Garden of Eden, what does that mean for the story we've been told for centuries? Before we continue, I want to ask you something important. Do you believe the story of Adam and Eve should be read literally, or as a symbolic record of humanity's spiritual journey? Comment your answer below, and I'll heart every comment to keep this conversation alive. Cayce's life was marked by thousands of trance sessions, many of them recorded and preserved by the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. In one of his most impactful readings in 1932, he described humanity before Adam and Eve, speaking about pre-Adamic races. He explained that souls had already been on Earth, taking on forms of thought and energy, gradually becoming physical. Adam, in Cayce's vision, was not the first human body, but the first to carry what he called a living soul, the moment when spirit fully united with flesh, giving rise to a new stage of human evolution. This perspective does not destroy the Bible, it expands it. It suggests that Genesis is less about the first biological man and woman and more about the first true awareness of the soul within humanity. Think about the implications of this. During the Great Depression, when people were desperate for hope, Cayce was telling families that the story of human origins was far bigger than Sunday sermons ever dared to explain. He spoke of Lemuria, Atlantis, and other forgotten civilizations that existed long before Adam. In these readings, humanity is portrayed as vast and ancient, with souls journeying across ages, trapped and liberated, learning through countless lifetimes. Imagine how shocking this must have been to people in the 1930s, raised in strict religious traditions, suddenly hearing that the first humans were not Adam and Eve at all. Yet Cayce's tone was never destructive. He didn't want to take away faith, he wanted to deepen it. When he was asked about Genesis, Cayce explained that the story of Adam and Eve is symbolic of every soul. It is the moment of choice, to remain in spiritual harmony or to descend into the density of material life. Adam and Eve, in this sense, represent all of us. The fall wasn't about a forbidden fruit in a garden, but about humanity choosing desire, ego, and physical attachment over divine connection. This way of seeing changes everything. Genesis is no longer a story about two individuals, but about the universal drama of every human soul. That's why Cayce could say with confidence that Adam and Eve were not the first humans. Others had already walked the earth, but they had not yet carried the same conscious union of spirit and matter that Cayce saw as the true beginning of humanity as we know it. When Cayce spoke of these pre-Adamic beings, he described them as entities of light, spiritual forms who gradually shaped themselves into material bodies. This was not mythology to him, it was a process of spiritual descent. The idea may sound mystical, but Cayce presented it as part of the natural order of evolution, where souls, longing to experience creation, slowly clothed themselves in matter. By the time Adam appeared, the earth was already inhabited by these beings in various forms, some more advanced, others still trapped in states between spirit and flesh. So when the Bible speaks of Adam being formed from the dust, Cayce saw this as a symbol of the soul fully entering the physical condition for the first time. Adam was not the beginning of humanity, but the beginning of humanity's awareness of itself as a soul living in flesh. This perspective raises a question that Cayce was often asked. If Adam and Eve were not the first, then who were the others? Cayce explained that souls had entered the earth through different channels in different regions. He referred to civilizations long forgotten, the Atlanteans, the Lemurians, the children of Mu, as the carriers of these pre-Adamic experiences. Their records, according to him, are hidden in what he called the Akashic records, a kind of spiritual memory of all time. These were not fantasies for Cayce's followers. They were revelations that reshaped how people understood human history. He suggested that traces of these civilizations still lie beneath the sands of Egypt and under the waters of the Atlantic, waiting to be discovered. Now let's connect this to Adam and Eve in the garden. In one of his most impactful sessions, Cayce explained that the serpent wasn't simply a reptile but represented the force of desire, the temptation to experience material pleasure instead of remaining in spiritual harmony. Eve's act of eating the fruit symbolized the soul giving in to desire, while Adam's participation represented the conscious choice to follow. For Cayce, this wasn't about two individuals making a single mistake. It was the story of all humanity, every soul that has ever chosen ego, desire, or pride over unity with the divine. That's why he believed Genesis is our story, not just theirs. Consider the effect this had in America at the time. People in Virginia Beach, Hopkinsville, and across the country were hearing that Adam and Eve were not the start of humanity, but a chapter in a much larger book of creation. This was during the years of war and hardship, when people were searching for meaning. Cayce's words gave them a sense of depth, that our existence didn't begin in a garden 6,000 years ago, but stretches back through ages, carrying lessons and choices from countless lives. Imagine being a farmer in Kentucky in the 1930s, hearing Cayce say that your soul had walked through civilizations that no history book mentions. That revelation alone could transform despair into a sense of purpose. The question many asked Cayce was simple but profound. If Adam and Eve were not the first humans, then what does that mean for the Bible? Cayce never dismissed scripture. Instead, he said it must be read on three levels: literal, symbolic, and spiritual. The literal story may not match historical science, but the symbolic truth reveals the journey of every soul. He explained that the Garden of Eden is not a place on earth, but a state of consciousness, the harmony between spirit and creator before the soul chose separation. This interpretation allows both faith and reason to coexist. The Bible remains sacred, not as a scientific record, but as a guide to understanding our own struggles, our own choices, and our own return to unity. This interpretation also sheds light on the story of Cain and Abel. Cayce described them less as two historical brothers and more as symbols of inner conflict. Cain represented the ego-driven self, grasping for control, while Abel symbolized the surrendered spirit aligned with divine law. The tragedy of Cain killing Abel was not just a family feud. It was the eternal drama of humanity, choosing selfishness over service, material gain over spiritual truth. In this sense, the mark of Cain was not about punishment on the skin, but the weight of separation carried by the soul. And yet, Cayce always emphasized redemption, that no matter how many times we fall, every soul is destined to find its way back to God. One of the most startling points came when Cayce was asked, where did Cain find his wife? According to the traditional story, only Adam, Eve, and their children existed. But Cayce explained that other groups of humans already lived outside the Edenic narrative. These were the pre-Adamic races, those souls who had incarnated through different streams of evolution, scattered across the world. To Cayce, this explained the mystery. Cain did not marry his sister. He united with one of these other beings. For people listening in the 1930s, this was shocking, but strangely liberating. It answered a biblical puzzle that had troubled theologians for centuries, while also confirming Cayce's broader vision of humanity's vast and ancient origins. Think of the ripple effects of this teaching. In Virginia Beach, members of the Association for Research and Enlightenment were carefully recording these words, preserving them for future generations. During the years of global war, when humanity was questioning its very survival, Cayce reminded them that our story did not begin in a garden and would not end on a battlefield. We are souls, eternal travelers, who have lived before and will live again. The story of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, is the story of every choice we make, between harmony and conflict, between love and fear, between spiritual growth and material temptation. And by understanding that Adam and Eve were not the first, we realize that humanity's destiny is far older and far greater than we ever imagined. When we look at Cayce's teachings in the broader context, we see that he was not trying to dismantle faith, but to rebuild it on deeper foundations. He often said that truth is one, but our understanding of it changes over time. For centuries, people clung to the idea that Adam and Eve were the literal first humans because it gave a sense of order and clarity. But Cayce opened a door. Humanity existed long before, in ways that stretch the imagination. He spoke of souls inhabiting different forms, even describing how some early beings looked less like us and more like creatures of thought and energy, slowly densifying into physical matter. This interpretation aligns the biblical story with a universal human journey, bridging ancient scripture with modern curiosity. What makes this so powerful is how Cayce rooted his revelations in real lives. Families would come to him for help with illness, finances, or spiritual despair. In the middle of those personal readings, he would suddenly reveal sweeping truths about the origin of humanity. Imagine a mother in the 1930s sitting in Virginia Beach expecting advice for her sick child, and hearing that her soul had existed long before Adam and Eve, walking through ages forgotten by history. This wasn't abstract philosophy. It was Cayce showing people that their struggles were part of something far greater, part of a cosmic journey of growth and redemption. That sense of belonging to eternity gave hope where medicine, money, or politics could not. Another crucial layer of Cayce's message was his teaching on the fall of man. He explained that the fall was not about eating a piece of fruit, but about the soul's choice to attach itself to the material world. That moment is universal. Every one of us has repeated it in countless lives. The serpent, the temptation, is not a character but a force we feel daily, the pull toward ego, desire, and separation from spirit. When Adam and Eve fell, they mirrored a choice every soul must face: to live for the self or to live for the Creator. This made the story timeless, not ancient history, but a living reality. Each time we choose compassion over pride, service over selfishness, we reverse the fall within ourselves. Of course, Cayce faced critics. Many pastors, theologians, and scientists of his time accused him of distorting the Bible or inventing fantasies. Yet Cayce himself was a devout Christian, reading the Bible once every year of his life. He never claimed to replace Scripture. He sought to reveal its hidden layers. In fact, he often reminded people to stay rooted in prayer, meditation, and service. For him, the revelations about pre-Adamic races or the symbolism of Genesis were not distractions, but tools to draw people closer to God. He wanted humanity to see that the Creator's plan was far bigger than we imagined, that the story of Adam and Eve was just one chapter in a book that stretches across eternity. Cayce also connected the story of Adam and Eve with the destiny of humanity as a whole. He said that just as the soul once chose to descend into matter, there will come a time when humanity collectively chooses to rise again into spirit. This is why he emphasized that the fall was not the end, but the beginning of a long journey of return. He described history as cycles. Civilizations rise and fall, souls enter and leave, but the ultimate purpose remains the same: to remember our divine origin and live in harmony with it. Seen in this way, Genesis becomes less a record of beginnings and more a mirror of where we are now. Every conflict, every temptation, every struggle echoes that first choice, and every act of love is a step back toward the garden within us. During the years of war, when the world was collapsing into violence, Cayce often reminded people that humanity was older and wiser than the current chaos suggested. He spoke of ages when we walked with the divine more closely, and of ages when we strayed into darkness. His references to Atlantis and Lemuria were not fantasy stories but warnings. Civilizations fall when they choose ego over service, power over love. To him, Adam and Eve represented the first fall, and every empire since has repeated their pattern in its own way. This gave his followers a sobering message: our choices matter not just individually, but collectively. Just as the fall was universal, redemption must also be universal. For those who asked how to live with this knowledge, Cayce gave simple answers: prayer, meditation, and service to others. He believed that through these practices, we reconnect with the original harmony that Adam and Eve lost. He said that meditation aligns us with the divine pattern, prayer opens the heart to guidance, and service grounds the spirit in love. These were not abstract rituals, they were daily practices that helped people survive the despair of poverty, illness, and war. Cayce insisted that every act of kindness, no matter how small, was a reversal of the fall. In serving others, we rediscover the divine image within ourselves, and here lies the heart of Cayce's revelation. Adam and Eve were not the first humans because the story is not about the beginning of bodies, but about the beginning of souls fully aware of their choice. The pre-Adamic beings remind us that humanity is vast, ancient, and eternal. The Garden of Eden reminds us that paradise is a state of consciousness, lost not by two individuals, but by all of us, and regained through every choice of love over fear. Cayce's message is not one of despair, but of hope. No matter how many times we fall, the way back is always open. This is why his words, spoken in Virginia Beach nearly a century ago, still echo today. They remind us that our story is bigger than any single lifetime, bigger than any scripture, bigger even than history itself. Now imagine this. During a quiet evening in Virginia Beach, a small group gathered around Cayce as he entered one of his deep trances. They expected advice for health or guidance for daily struggles, but instead, he spoke words that shook the very foundation of their beliefs. He revealed that the true origin of humanity stretched beyond Adam and Eve, beyond the stories they had learned as children. He said that each person present had walked the earth before, not once but many times, carrying lessons and scars from ages long forgotten. For those who listened, it was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it challenged everything they thought they knew. Liberating because it gave meaning to their pain, hope to their struggles, and purpose to their existence. This is where Cayce's gift becomes clear. He was not just a prophet, he was a bridge between worlds. He showed that the Bible stories are not cages but doors, not limits but keys to a greater understanding. Adam and Eve did not mark the beginning of humanity. They marked the moment when the soul chose to fully experience what it means to be human. That means your life, with all its victories and mistakes, is part of a story written across eternity. It means that the choices you make today echo the choices made at the dawn of time. It means that every act of compassion, every step toward truth is a return to the Eden within. So let me leave you with this question. If Adam and Eve were not the first humans but symbols of a greater truth, what does that say about your own story? Could it be that your struggles are not random, but part of the same journey humanity has been walking for ages? Edgar Cayce believed they were. He believed that every soul, including yours, carries within it the memory of paradise and the promise of return. That is why his message still matters, because it is not about the past, but about the choices we make now. If this revelation touched you, share this video with someone who needs hope. Comment below with your thoughts, and let's create a space where seekers of truth can connect. I'll be marking your comments with a little heart to show that I've read them, because your voice matters here. And if you want to continue uncovering the hidden wisdom of Edgar Cayce, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. There are still so many mysteries waiting to be revealed, and together we can explore them all. Remember, the story of Adam and Eve is not just theirs, it's ours. And the way back to Eden begins with the choices you make today. Mysterious letters to the 7 churches in the Book of Revelation were not just ancient warnings to distant communities, but a hidden map of your own soul. Edgar Cayce, often called the Sleeping Prophet, revealed that these churches are not merely places in history, but symbols of the 7 spiritual centers within every human being. In his readings, Cayce explained that Revelation is not only a prophecy of the end times, but also a profound guide to inner awakening. The 7 churches represent the 7 chakras, the gateways through which we rise from the struggles of earthly life to the light of divine consciousness. This means that the final book of the Bible is not just about a distant future, but about the spiritual battle happening right now inside you. Stay with me, because in this video we will uncover what Cayce truly said, and you will see how this ancient text carries a personal message for your faith, your body, and your spirit. Before we begin, I want you to leave a comment below telling me if you believe Revelation is symbolic or literal. I will mark your comment with a little heart to show that I read it personally. Your interaction helps build a community of seekers like you. Watch carefully until the end, because what you are about to hear will change the way you understand the Bible, your own soul, and the mysterious connection between heaven and within. Edgar Cayce's interpretation of the Book of Revelation is one of the most profound and challenging teachings he ever gave. When asked about the meaning of this mysterious text, Cayce did not speak about fire, destruction, or catastrophic predictions as so many others did. Instead, he described revelation as a map of the human soul and its journey towards spiritual awakening. He explained that the 7 churches mentioned in the letters of John were not only communities in Asia Minor 2,000 years ago, but also symbols of the 7 spiritual centers within each of us. These centers, which Cayce compared to the chakras of Eastern traditions, are points where the body, the mind, and the spirit connect, and where divine energy can flow if awakened and purified. This means that the Book of Revelation, often feared as a book of doom, is actually a guide for inner transformation. The drama of angels, seals, trumpets, and visions is not only cosmic, but also deeply personal, happening inside your own being. Cayce said that understanding this hidden meaning requires prayer, meditation, and a willingness to live according to the highest ideals of Christ. He insisted that revelation is the story of the Christ consciousness being awakened within the soul, not just a prophecy about the end of the world. To grasp the depth of this, imagine that each church mentioned by John is like a doorway. The letter to Ephesus is not only a message to an ancient congregation, but to the foundation of your life, your root center. It calls for faithfulness and endurance, reminding us that without a strong foundation in spiritual truth, nothing can last. The message to Smyrna, the 2nd church, speaks of suffering and tribulation, but also of the crown of life. For Cayce, this relates to the center of creativity and passion within us, the place where our emotions are refined through trials. The Church of Pergamum, the 3rd, was warned against false teachings. This connects to the solar plexus, where our will and personal power can either be corrupted by selfish desires or uplifted in service to God. Then comes Thyatira, which Cayce linked to the heart center. Here the message is about love, charity, and patience, but also about the danger of letting impurity distort the deepest force we have, which is love. As John moves on to Sardis, the 5th church, the words are almost like a warning to a soul that has fallen asleep. You have a name that you are alive, but you are dead. Cayce saw this as the throat center, the place of communication, truth, and expression. If we fail to use our voice for truth and light, we lose vitality. Then comes Philadelphia, the 6th church, which John calls the one with an open door. Cayce linked this to the 3rd eye, the seat of spiritual vision and intuition. To those who remain faithful, no one can shut the door that God has opened. Finally, there is Laodicea, the lukewarm church, neither hot nor cold, which Cayce connected to the crown, the highest center. It represents the full opening of divine consciousness, but also the danger of indifference. Without devotion, even the crown can remain closed. Cayce explained that the letters are not merely moral advice, but living keys to awaken each center. By applying them in prayer and meditation, the seeker opens the flow of energy from the base of the spine to the top of the head, what Eastern traditions call the Kundalini, but Cayce framed within a Christian context. He insisted that this path is not about seeking power or mystical experiences for their own sake. Instead, it is about aligning every part of our being with the Spirit of Christ. Revelation, then, is the story of how the soul becomes the temple of the living God, where Christ consciousness reigns. This is why Cayce repeatedly said that the kingdom of heaven is within you, and that John's visions are both universal and deeply personal. The beauty of this teaching is that it unites traditions. Without denying the Bible, Cayce connected it with timeless truths from other spiritual paths. He showed that the apocalypse is not just an ending, but a beginning. It is not about destruction, but about transformation. In fact, Cayce often emphasized that fear is the greatest barrier to spiritual growth. If you read Revelation only with fear, you miss its deepest meaning. But if you read it as a mirror of your soul, it becomes a source of courage, renewal, and faith. And this is why today, as we explore his words, we can understand that Revelation is not just a mystery book reserved for theologians. It is a practical, living guide for every seeker who wants to know God more intimately and to awaken the divine potential within. Cayce warned that unlocking these centers is not something to take lightly. He said the process must always be guided by faith, prayer, and a sincere desire to serve others, because the misuse of these forces can cause harm. For example, he explained that if someone tries to awaken these energies without discipline, humility, or spiritual grounding, the result could be physical or mental imbalance. That is why in his readings, he constantly reminded seekers that Christ must be at the center of their journey. Without Christ consciousness, the awakening of the spiritual centers becomes dangerous. With Christ consciousness, however, it becomes the most powerful transformation a human being can experience. Revelation, therefore, is not a manual for fear, but a roadmap for this sacred awakening, where each symbol, each trumpet, and each seal represents a step in the soul's evolution. He often told study groups to read Revelation slowly, prayerfully, and to apply its lessons to daily life. For Cayce, the Bible was not a book to be analyzed only with the intellect, but a living text to be lived. When John speaks of overcoming trials, Cayce explained, it means conquering selfishness, anger, pride, and fear within ourselves. When John describes the opening of the seals, it is the opening of higher levels of awareness. When the Lamb takes the scroll, it is the Christ within claiming lordship over the soul. This perspective gives Revelation a new depth. It is not only a cosmic drama about the fate of the world, but a personal drama about your own awakening. Take the vision of the throne in Revelation chapter 4, for example. John describes lightning, thunder, and a rainbow around the throne of God. Cayce said, this is a picture of what happens when the centers of the body are harmonized. The rainbow symbolizes the flow of spiritual energy rising through the body, just like the colors of the chakras. The throne itself is the crown center, where divine consciousness resides. This means that the visions of John are not only heavenly scenes, but also inner experiences. They are glimpses into the spiritual anatomy of the soul, and this is why Cayce urged his listeners to meditate on Revelation not with fear, but with reverence and expectation, because it holds the key to discovering the kingdom of heaven within. Another striking example is the vision of the New Jerusalem. For centuries, readers imagined it as a city descending from the sky. Cayce did not deny its cosmic meaning, but he also said that it represents the perfected soul, the human being fully illuminated by Christ. The gates of pearl, the foundations of precious stones, the streets of gold, all of these are symbols of virtues, energies, and qualities that shine in the soul when it becomes a dwelling place of God. In this sense, the final chapters of Revelation are not about escape from earth, but about the transformation of human beings into living temples. The apocalypse, therefore, is not destruction, but unveiling. The Greek word apocalypsis means revelation, disclosure, or unveiling. And what is unveiled is the true self, the divine image within, which Cayce said is the Christ in you, the hope of glory. This teaching can be challenging because it requires us to stop waiting for external signs and start looking within. Cayce's message is clear. The great battle of revelation is not only out there in the world, but inside the human heart. The beast is not only a figure in prophecy, but the lower nature within us, our selfish desires and fears. The false prophet is not only a political deceiver, but the lies we tell ourselves when we ignore the voice of the Spirit. And the victory of the Lamb is not only the triumph of Christ at the end of time, but the victory of divine love within your soul when you surrender fully to God. This is why Cayce insisted that the apocalypse is a personal journey, one that each of us must face with courage and faith. When we look at the 7 churches in this way, they become not just historical locations, but stages of spiritual growth. Ephesus teaches us about loyalty to our first love, the foundation of faith. Smyrna teaches us that suffering can refine us and lead to life. Pergamum warns us to keep our minds pure and not be seduced by false doctrines. Thyatira reminds us of the power of love and patience, but also the need for discernment. Sardis warns us not to fall asleep spiritually. Philadelphia offers us an open door to spiritual vision, and Laodicea challenges us not to be lukewarm, but to devote ourselves fully to God. Each letter is like a mirror, asking us to examine a part of ourselves, to repent, to awaken, and to move closer to divine union. In his readings, Cayce often connected the process of awakening the 7 centers with the practice of meditation. He recommended that seekers sit quietly, focus the mind on God, and use prayerful affirmations to align their thoughts with divine truth. He described how the life force moves through the body and rises along what he called the river of life. As this force moves from one center to another, it awakens new levels of awareness. But Cayce never separated this practice from daily living. He said that meditation without application is useless. If a person meditates on divine love but then acts selfishly or cruelly in life, the centers cannot remain open. Only when meditation is combined with service, forgiveness, and compassion does the flow of energy remain steady and uplifting. This was one of Cayce's constant warnings. Spiritual awakening is not about escape from life, but deeper involvement in it. He reminded people that Christ washed the feet of his disciples, showing that true greatness is service. In the same way, anyone who seeks to awaken their higher centers must begin with humility and a willingness to help others. The Book of Revelation, then, is not a fantasy of supernatural visions far removed from daily struggles. It is a blueprint for living with faith, courage, and love in the midst of trials. When John describes beasts, plagues, and battles, Cayce saw them as symbols of the conflicts inside every soul. We all battle between selfishness and selflessness, between fear and trust, between the old self and the new self. The victory comes when we choose to let Christ reign in us, and that victory is just as real today as it was in the time of John. One of the most powerful passages Cayce commented on is the image of the Lamb standing as though slain, yet alive. For him, this was the heart of the revelation. The Lamb represents Christ, but also the Christ consciousness in every soul, the part of us that surrenders, sacrifices, and yet lives eternally. Cayce explained that the Lamb taking the scroll means that divine love is the only force capable of unlocking the mysteries of life. Intellect alone cannot open the seals. Power alone cannot open them. Only love can. And when love reigns in the heart, the soul begins to see life differently. Trials become opportunities, enemies become teachers, and death itself becomes a doorway to greater life. This is why the Lamb is at the center of the vision, because love is at the center of all spiritual awakening. Cayce also emphasized that the visions of judgment in Revelation are not about God's anger, but about the natural consequences of our choices. He said, every thought, every action sets into motion a law of cause and effect, and Revelation shows these consequences on a cosmic scale. Yet even in the midst of warnings, the message is always one of hope. The constant refrain is to the one who overcomes. Every church, every vision includes a promise. If you overcome, you will receive the crown of life. You will eat from the tree of life. You will not be harmed by the second death. You will be given a white stone with a new name. These promises, Cayce explained, are not distant rewards but inner experiences of peace, joy, and divine communion that begin here and now for those who live faithfully. If we read Revelation with this understanding, it stops being a closed book of terror and becomes a living guide to the journey of the soul. The seals, the trumpets, the bowls, the beasts, the new heaven and new earth, all of these are symbols of what happens when the Spirit of God works in us. The 7 churches are the beginning of the path, the preparation of the body as a temple. The seals are the opening of deeper levels of the mind. The trumpets are the awakening of the spirit. The New Jerusalem is the completion of the process, the soul fully united with God. Cayce wanted us to see that the entire drama is both cosmic and personal. It is the story of humanity, but also the story of each individual soul. It is not only about the end of history, but the transformation of the heart. For many who came to Cayce with questions about prophecy, the temptation was always to know when the end of the world would arrive. Yet Cayce redirected them again and again. He said the greater question is not when the world will end, but whether the Christ has been born within you. He explained that the signs of Revelation are less about external dates and more about inner conditions. When greed, hatred, and pride dominate a person, then the beast rules in that life. When love, forgiveness, and truth prevail, then the Lamb reigns. The apocalypse, therefore, is not an event to fear, but a choice to make. Each day you decide whether to feed the beast or follow the Lamb. Each moment you decide whether to be lukewarm or to open the door where Christ is knocking. This is why Cayce urged people to read Revelation not with curiosity about the end, but with urgency about the present. The battle is here and now within your own soul. He often said that the Bible is written in the language of symbols because these truths are universal and timeless. They speak to every generation, not just to the first century or the last. Revelation, for Cayce, is a book of hope because it shows that no matter how dark the struggle, victory is promised to those who endure in faith. Even the most frightening images, like the dragon or the lake of fire, are not final condemnations but pictures of purification. Fire in the Bible often symbolizes cleansing, not destruction. And Cayce explained that the soul passes through trials not as punishment but as opportunity, so that impurities can be burned away and the divine image can shine more clearly. This is why he described Revelation as a love story hidden under the appearance of judgment. It is the story of God's relentless love calling the soul back home, even through suffering. Another key point Cayce emphasized is that every individual has the responsibility to interpret Revelation personally. He discouraged people from relying only on preachers, scholars, or even his own words. He said the true meaning comes when you read prayerfully and ask God to show you how each passage applies to your life. This is the way the Spirit speaks, he explained, not only through ancient prophets but directly to the heart that seeks truth. When you read the letters to the churches, ask yourself, which of these messages speaks to me today? Where have I lost my first love? Where have I become lukewarm? Where am I being asked to remain faithful? By doing this, Revelation becomes not just a record of John's vision, but a living dialogue between God and your soul. Cayce's vision of the chakras and the 7 churches also bridges a gap between East and West. Many in his time had little knowledge of Eastern traditions, yet he showed that the wisdom of the chakras was hidden in the Bible all along. This did not mean replacing Christianity with something foreign. Instead, it meant understanding that all truth is one. The body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and the 7 centers are the altars within it. When John writes to the churches, he is also writing to these inner altars, urging them to be purified and dedicated to God. The result is not a strange or foreign religion, but a deeper Christianity, one that unites heart, mind, and spirit. Cayce believed this unity was essential for the future of humanity, because true peace comes only when we see that all wisdom, wherever it is found, leads back to the same source, the living Christ within. Cayce explained that this process of awakening is not achieved overnight. It is a gradual transformation, and it requires daily discipline. He advised that people begin and end each day with prayer, keeping their thoughts centered on Christ. He even suggested that each person choose an ideal, a word or phrase that embodies their highest spiritual goal, and to measure all their actions against it. For many, that ideal might be simply Christ. For others, it could be love, service, or truth. Whatever the word, he said it becomes like a compass, keeping the soul aligned when temptations or distractions arise. Without such an ideal, the forces awakened by meditation and study could easily be misused. With an ideal, however, they become channels of blessing, not only for the individual, but for everyone around them. In this way, the letters to the 7 churches are like personal examinations. They show us where we are strong and where we are weak. Do we still have our first love, or have we grown cold? Are we faithful even in trials, or do we complain and despair? Do we speak truth, or do we compromise? Do we keep our hearts pure, or do we allow corruption? Do we remain awake, or are we spiritually dead? Do we use the open door of vision, or do we ignore it? Do we burn with devotion, or are we lukewarm? These are not abstract questions. They are the daily questions every believer faces. Cayce made it clear that Revelation is not meant to frighten us, but to awaken us. It is God calling us to rise higher, to cleanse every center of our being, and to allow divine love to flow freely from head to toe. One of the most practical instructions Cayce gave was about service. He said the surest way to keep the spiritual centers open is to help others. Love is not real unless it is lived. You cannot awaken the heart center, for example, unless you practice kindness, forgiveness, and charity. You cannot awaken the throat center unless you speak words of truth and encouragement. You cannot awaken the crown unless you devote your whole life to God. Meditation and prayer prepare the way, but service keeps the channels open. This is why Cayce never separated spirituality from daily duties. He told parents to raise their children with patience and love, workers to be honest in their labor, and everyone to treat their neighbors with respect. In this way, revelation becomes practical. It is not only visions and symbols, but concrete steps to live with integrity and compassion. Perhaps the most moving aspect of Cayce's interpretation is his vision of hope. He said no matter how many times a person fails, the door is always open to return. Just as each letter to the churches includes a rebuke, it also includes a promise. God never abandons the soul. Even Laodicea, the most condemned church, is told that Christ stands at the door and knocks, waiting to enter. For Cayce, this was proof that divine love is patient and persistent. We may resist, ignore, or even deny God, but Christ continues to call. The apocalypse is not the end of hope, but the beginning of redemption. The final vision of the New Jerusalem is not only about a perfect city, but about God dwelling with humanity, wiping away every tear, and making all things new. That promise, Cayce said, is for every soul who chooses to overcome. Cayce's vision of revelation closes with the assurance that spiritual awakening is the destiny of every soul. He believed that humanity is moving step by step toward greater awareness of its divine nature. The 7 churches, the seals, the trumpets, and the visions are all part of the inner journey from ignorance to enlightenment, from fear to love, from separation to union with God. For him, the apocalypse was never meant to be read as a threat hanging over us, but as a promise that within every struggle there is a path to victory. This is why he urged seekers not to get lost in speculation about dates or disasters, but to live each day in alignment with Christ. The real revelation, he said, is when the Christ becomes alive in you. When we place his teachings side by side with the text of Revelation, the message becomes clear. The 7 churches are not only places on a map, but living centers in the body. The visions are not only scenes in heaven, but mirrors of the soul. The New Jerusalem is not only a city, but the perfected state of being when God dwells fully within. This interpretation does not take away from the sacredness of Scripture. It deepens it. It shows that the Bible is not just about history or prophecy, but about transformation. It speaks to the body, the mind, and the spirit together. It calls us to prepare ourselves as temples where the Spirit can live. And this, Cayce said, is the true meaning of resurrection and eternal life. For the modern seeker, this message could not be more relevant. In a world filled with fear, conflict, and uncertainty, Revelation can easily be read as a book of terror. But through Cayce's lens, it becomes a book of hope. It tells us that no matter how dark things seem, light will prevail. No matter how strong evil appears, love is stronger. No matter how many times we fall, the promise of renewal is always available. The apocalypse, then, is not destruction, but unveiling. It is the unveiling of the divine within you, the moment when you realize that God has always been with you, guiding, correcting, and inviting you into deeper communion. As we reflect on these truths, the challenge is to apply them. The message is not complete until it is lived. The 7 churches are not just symbols to be studied, they are calls to action. Ask yourself, where in my life do I need to return to my first love? Where do I need to endure with patience? Where do I need to speak the truth more boldly? Where have I grown lukewarm? These are the questions that turn Revelation from a distant prophecy into a living guide. And if you take even one step in response, you are already beginning the journey that leads to the New Jerusalem within. Now it is your turn. What do you think about Edgar Cayce's interpretation of Revelation? Do you believe the 7 churches are symbolic of the chakras within us? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and I will mark your comment with a heart to show that I read it. And if this message has inspired you, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who seek deeper truth. Together we can continue exploring the mysteries of the Spirit, always guided by faith, always anchored in the love of Christ. Have you ever wondered if there is a hidden key that could slow down aging, restore vitality, and even bring back a sense of youthfulness to your body and mind? Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, left behind extraordinary readings that reveal practices and truths about rejuvenation and longevity that most people have never heard of. He spoke not only about physical health, but about the deep connection between body, mind, and spirit, explaining that true renewal comes when all three are in harmony. In this video, we will uncover Cayce's guidance on prayer, forgiveness, purpose, diet, and spiritual alignment, teachings that can change the way you see aging forever. If you are searching for strength, healing, and a deeper faith in the life that God gave you, this message may be exactly what you need to hear today. I want you to stay with me until the end, because what Cayce revealed could reshape your understanding of life and health. And I want to ask you something important. Leave your comment below about what longevity means to you. I will mark each comment with a little heart, because your participation matters and builds this community of faith and learning. This is not just information. It is an invitation to live with more light, more health, and more purpose. Edgar Cayce often reminded us that the body is not separate from the mind or the spirit. To him, true health was never just about physical strength, but about alignment with higher laws of life. He explained that rejuvenation begins in thought, because the way we think shapes the way our bodies respond. If we live with constant fear, resentment, or hopelessness, our cells reflect that condition, and aging comes faster. But if we learn to pray, to forgive, to live with purpose and faith, the body responds with vitality. Cayce said that every cell in our body has a memory, and that memory can be renewed when we feed it with life-giving thoughts, clean foods, and spiritual connection. This is not fantasy, it is a principle he taught in hundreds of readings, urging people to take responsibility for their inner life so that outer life could flourish. Think about this for a moment. What if your aging is not only about your years, but about the energy you hold each day? Cayce saw illness and early decline as signals that the person had lost balance, and he pointed to the restoration of that balance as the path to longevity. He encouraged simple yet powerful practices: daily prayer, meditation, stretching, circulation of the body through walking and movement, wholesome foods, castor oil packs for purification, and above all, keeping the spirit in harmony with God. He said that joy, kindness, and love are not just emotions, but forces that renew the very tissues of the body. Cayce also emphasized that diet plays a vital role, but not in the way modern fads present it. He spoke of moderation, of eating more vegetables and fruits grown in the earth, foods that carry the vitality of creation itself. He warned against heavy meats, too much sugar, and processed foods that lacked life force. To him, food was not only fuel, it was medicine that should keep the body light and able to circulate its energies freely. He described how congestion in the body, whether from poor digestion, toxins, or negative emotions, creates blockages that accelerate aging. Rejuvenation, then, was not a single act, but a daily choice to keep body, mind, and spirit clear and flowing. When the body is clean, the mind peaceful, and the spirit aligned, life can extend far beyond what most imagine. Cayce even explained that aging is not punishment, but the result of how we choose to live. Every habit, every thought, every prayer, every word either builds up life or drains it. This teaching might sound simple, but it is radical because it places power in your own hands. You are not helpless before time. You are a co-creator of your vitality with God. And this is what Cayce meant when he said that rejuvenation is possible. Now imagine the implications of this. If thought, prayer, and alignment with God can restore vitality, then every day you have the chance to renew yourself. Cayce often told people who felt old, tired, or broken that they were not finished, that they could rise again with new energy if they returned to harmony. He encouraged people to find purpose, because without purpose the body and mind decay. Purpose acts as fire in the soul, and the body responds to that fire with renewed strength. Think about the people you have seen who look younger than their age. Very often they live with meaning, with faith, with joy. That is not coincidence, it is the very principle Cayce revealed. Renewal is not just about wrinkles or years, it is about the spark that comes from living connected to God and to others in love. And that spark is available to you no matter your age. Cayce also highlighted the role of forgiveness. Unforgiveness, he explained, poisons the body and shortens life. Resentment becomes a weight in the heart, and that weight affects circulation, digestion, and even the nervous system. When you forgive, you release not only another person, but also yourself. Forgiveness clears the channels of the spirit, allowing life force to move freely again. This is why he urged people to pray for their enemies, to let go of grudges, and to keep the heart open. Rejuvenation is not only physical, it is deeply spiritual. Without forgiveness, no amount of healthy food or exercise can bring full renewal, because the soul is still bound. With forgiveness, however, a wave of healing can touch the body and bring surprising restoration. Cayce connected this to faith, reminding us that we are temples of the living God, and that when we live as such, life flows abundantly. For Cayce, rejuvenation was also tied to circulation. He often recommended simple exercises like stretching the body in the morning, deep breathing, and walking outdoors to stimulate the flow of blood and energy. He explained that when the blood circulates freely, it carries vitality to every cell, and the mind is refreshed. He warned against a sedentary life, saying that inactivity leads to stagnation, and stagnation leads to decline. Yet he also warned against extremes, reminding that moderation is the key. Too much exercise without spiritual alignment can wear the body out, just as too much food without balance can poison it. Everything must work together, body, mind, and spirit. This principle of balance is the real key to longevity, and it is why so many people who followed Cayce's guidance reported not only physical improvement, but peace of mind and renewal of faith. He never separated medicine from prayer, nor health from love. For him, they were one reality. Cayce made it clear that sleep was not just rest, but a sacred moment of restoration. He said that during sleep, the body repairs itself, the mind reorganizes impressions, and the spirit reconnects with higher planes. Those who neglect proper rest or fill their nights with anxious thoughts rob themselves of the natural rejuvenation that God designed. He recommended going to bed earlier, keeping a routine, and even saying a prayer before sleep so that the subconscious would be filled with light. This was not superstition, but a profound understanding of how spirit directs the body. When the subconscious is aligned with divine truth, the body responds with healing and renewal. Cayce explained that dreams often carried messages for health, and paying attention to them could guide a person in correcting habits, attitudes, or even relationships that were draining vitality. In this way, even the night became a tool for longevity. Another important element Cayce stressed was the power of joy. Joy, he said, is a spiritual medicine that directly influences the body. When we laugh, sing, or express gratitude, the nervous system relaxes, digestion improves, circulation increases, and cells are nourished. On the other hand, living in constant sadness, criticism, or anger accelerates decline. Cayce's readings often pointed out that many diseases began in the mind long before they appeared in the body. Therefore, cultivating joy was not optional, it was essential. He encouraged people to spend time in nature, to serve others, to read inspiring words, and to stay connected with family and community. All of these create joy, and joy creates renewal. Notice how this differs from much of modern thinking that focuses only on external solutions. Cayce turned the focus inward to the spiritual and emotional life that governs the physical. He also gave practical advice about cleansing the body. One of his well-known recommendations was the use of castor oil packs applied over the abdomen to stimulate the lymphatic system and promote detoxification. He saw the elimination of toxins as crucial to longevity, because when waste accumulates, the body becomes sluggish and disease thrives. Alongside this, he urged people to drink pure water, to avoid overeating, and to fast lightly at times to allow the body to reset. These practices were not about vanity, but about keeping the body as a fit instrument for the soul. He reminded people that the body is the temple of the spirit, and keeping it clean honors God. This attitude of reverence turns even the act of eating or cleansing into a spiritual practice. And when the temple is clean, the presence of the divine is felt more strongly, bringing peace and vitality. Cayce was very clear that longevity without purpose was meaningless. He said that the soul came into this world for growth, and that physical life was a gift to be used for service. People who only sought to prolong life for selfish reasons missed the true blessing of longevity. Real rejuvenation, he said, is found in giving, in loving, in fulfilling the mission God places in your heart. He reminded that even an elderly person with weak limbs could shine with youthfulness if their spirit was strong in purpose. On the other hand, a person who abandoned purpose would age quickly, no matter how young they were. This is why Cayce called people to prayer, to reading scripture, to serving their neighbors. These acts connect the soul to eternal life, and eternal life breathes youth into the present body. Longevity, then, is not just about years, it is about fullness of living. When we consider all these teachings together, a picture begins to emerge. Cayce was not offering a magic formula, but a path of daily discipline that touches every part of life. The body must be cared for with clean food, movement, and rest. The mind must be guided with uplifting thoughts, joy, and forgiveness. The spirit must be kept in harmony with God through prayer, faith, and service. When these three move together, rejuvenation is not only possible, it is natural. This is why he said that age is not measured only in years, but in how closely one lives to the divine law. Some people grow old quickly because they live cut off from spirit. Others remain youthful into advanced age because they live in harmony with love. And the choice, Cayce insisted, belongs to each of us. Cayce also spoke about the importance of breathing. To him, breath was more than oxygen. It was life force itself. He recommended daily deep breathing exercises, ideally outdoors, where fresh air could fill the lungs and revitalize the blood. He said that when the lungs expand fully and rhythmically, the entire body receives renewed vitality, the mind clears, and the spirit becomes calm. Shallow breathing, on the other hand, weakens the system and contributes to fatigue and premature aging. He explained that breathing is linked to prayer, because in every breath we receive life from God, and in every exhalation we have the chance to release fear, anger, and tension. Practicing conscious breathing was, for him, a spiritual discipline that touched every level of existence. It was not complicated, but it was powerful. Those who applied this advice often reported new energy and clarity, even without drastic changes in other areas. He placed equal importance on attitudes. A person's attitude toward life, he said, creates either disease or healing. If you wake up expecting trouble, constantly speaking negative words, the body absorbs that message and weakens. If you choose to expect good, to trust God's guidance, and to speak words of life, the body responds with strength. Cayce explained that words themselves carry vibration, and these vibrations affect the cells. Words of anger or fear break down the body, while words of love and faith build it up. This principle is simple but life-changing. It means that every day, in the way you think and speak, you are choosing rejuvenation or decline. He urged people to be mindful of their conversations, to avoid gossip, to bless others, and to speak with gratitude. These practices not only heal relationships, they also renew the speaker. Another theme Cayce emphasized was harmony with nature. He said that being outdoors, walking among trees, touching the earth, or standing by the ocean helps balance the energies of the body. Nature radiates the order of God's creation, and when we immerse ourselves in it, our nervous system calms, blood pressure lowers, and vitality returns. He explained that humans were never meant to live cut off from nature, surrounded only by artificial environments. Even a few minutes in the sun, breathing deeply, could bring renewal. He recommended gardening, walking barefoot on the grass, and spending time near water as natural therapies for health. To him, these were not luxuries, but necessities for longevity. They reconnect the human spirit with its source and remind the body of its natural rhythms. Cayce often repeated that the greatest healer is love. Love, he said, is the energy that binds creation, and when it flows through us, it renews everything it touches. He described love as the one force that can restore broken hearts, anxious minds, and even diseased bodies. When people live in bitterness, isolation, or hate, they wither. When they live in love, they blossom, regardless of age. He told many who came to him with illness to love more, to serve more, to forgive more. This was not sentimental advice. It was a directive for survival and rejuvenation. Love increases circulation, steadies the nerves, deepens sleep, and opens the spirit to God's healing power. Those who live in love carry a radiance that no wrinkle can hide. Cayce's message was that youth is not only skin deep, it is soul deep, and love is the soul's fountain of youth. Cayce also warned about the dangers of fear. He explained that fear is one of the most destructive forces for the human body and mind because it contracts, paralyzes, and blocks the natural flow of life energy. People who lived in fear aged quickly, often developing nervous disorders, digestive problems, or heart weakness. He encouraged replacing fear with faith, reminding us that faith is not simply belief, but a living trust in God's presence and guidance. When faith grows stronger, fear loses its grip and the body responds with vitality. Cayce often pointed to Scripture, saying that perfect love casts out fear, and where love is present, renewal follows. He urged people to meditate daily, to affirm words of trust, and to hold on to the promises of God, because in that state, the entire being moves toward health and longevity. Fear drains life, faith restores it. This teaching is both spiritual and practical, because fear not only disturbs the soul but literally affects chemistry, hormones, and circulation. Another practice Cayce recommended was service. He said that when people live only for themselves, their lives become small and their bodies weaken. But when they give of themselves, through kindness, prayer for others, or acts of help, their own souls are strengthened. Service brings joy, and joy rejuvenates. He often told individuals that the best cure for depression, anxiety, or even physical decline was to find someone to serve. This advice aligns with the law of life itself. What you give returns multiplied. A life of service is a life of energy, because it keeps the soul aligned with its divine purpose. Cayce's readings made it clear that no one is too poor, too weak, or too old to serve. Even a word of encouragement or a simple prayer can transform not only the receiver but also the giver. Service keeps the spirit alive, and when the spirit is alive, the body resists decay. Cayce also gave attention to the role of hope. He said that hope is the anchor of the soul, and without it people give up and their bodies follow. He explained that hopelessness often precedes disease, because when the soul loses its vision, the body loses its drive to live. Hope, however, fuels regeneration. People who expect tomorrow to bring new opportunities, new blessings, and new light live longer and stronger. Cayce urged those in despair to lift their eyes beyond the present suffering and to remember that life is eternal, that God's plan is larger than any trial. This perspective brought healing to many because it reignited the will to live. He believed that one of the greatest gifts we can give each other is hope, spoken through words, shown through actions, and lived in faith. To live in hope is to keep the spirit youthful, and a youthful spirit keeps the body renewed. It is important to understand that Cayce never separated spiritual truths from daily habits. For him, the secret of rejuvenation and longevity was not hidden in mysterious rituals, but in the simple, faithful practice of living in balance, eating clean foods, breathing deeply, sleeping well, forgiving often, serving gladly, loving freely, and trusting God. These are the real foundations of lasting vitality. He explained that medicine, prayer, exercise, and relationships are not separate paths, but one unified journey. The body reflects the soul, and the soul thrives when it lives according to divine law. This is why his guidance still speaks so strongly today, because it reminds us that health and youth are not accidents, but choices made daily. They are choices of faith, of thought, of action. And every viewer listening now has the power to begin, no matter their age or condition. Cayce also stressed the importance of consistency. He reminded people that transformation does not come from one single act, but from steady, daily effort. Just as the body ages day by day, renewal also happens day by day. He often warned against impatience, saying that those who give up quickly miss the blessings that come through perseverance. He explained that every prayer, every choice of healthy food, every act of kindness, every night of peaceful rest is like a deposit in the bank of vitality. Over time, these deposits grow into a wealth of health and strength. Many who came to him expected instant cures, but he directed them toward discipline. Discipline in thought, in spirit, in body. This is why his message remains so relevant, because it calls us back to the truth that real change is possible, but it requires faithfulness. Longevity is not luck. It is the fruit of living in harmony with eternal principles. He also highlighted the role of gratitude. Gratitude, Cayce said, changes the chemistry of the body. A thankful heart creates a flow of joy and peace that calms the nerves and strengthens the immune system. He urged people to begin and end each day with thanks, not only for blessings received, but even for challenges, because they shape the soul. Gratitude lifts the mind above worry and places it in the stream of divine flow. When we focus on what is good, the body responds with health. When we focus on what is lacking, the body weakens. This was more than psychology to Cayce, it was spiritual law. He knew that the energy of gratitude attracts more life, more strength, and more opportunities for growth. Those who live with gratitude radiate youthfulness because their spirits are light. Another area Cayce often returned to was the alignment of the spine and the circulation of energies through the nervous system. He recommended adjustments, massages, and exercises that helped keep the body's structure open and balanced. He explained that when the spine is misaligned, circulation is blocked, nerves are irritated, and the whole body suffers. But when alignment is restored, the life force flows freely and the body begins to heal itself. This principle shows once again that his approach was holistic. Rejuvenation is not about isolating one part of the body, but about keeping the entire system in balance. He even suggested simple stretches and gentle movements that anyone could do at home, always reminding that moderation and consistency were more important than extremes. Ultimately, Cayce taught that rejuvenation and longevity are gifts that flow from living in unity with God. He did not promise immortality of the body, but he revealed that the body can remain strong, youthful, and full of vitality far longer than most people imagine when it is guided by spirit. He reminded his followers that the soul is eternal, and as we align with eternal truths, the body naturally reflects that light. Death to Cayce was not an end but a transition, and while we live on earth, we are called to honor the gift of life through balance, love, and service. This vision transforms the way we see aging, not as a curse but as a journey of learning. And along that journey, we can choose to live with vitality, faith, and joy. This is the real key that few know, but that Cayce so faithfully shared. Cayce's message is both a challenge and an invitation. It challenges us to look honestly at the way we live, to see how our habits, thoughts, and emotions shape our health. It asks us to let go of bitterness, fear, laziness, and excess, and to embrace forgiveness, faith, discipline, and joy. But it is also an invitation to trust that God has built within us the power to renew, to heal, to be restored. Cayce was clear that no one is beyond hope, that no matter your age or condition, change is possible when you begin to align with these principles. He saw people who believed they were at the end of their strength rise again with new vitality, not because of magic, but because they allowed God's laws of life to work in them. This is why his teachings remain so powerful. They are not locked in the past. They are alive today, waiting for you to apply them. When you take these lessons seriously, you begin to see that youth is not a number, but a state of being. You may not stop the years from passing, but you can change the way those years touch you. You can remain strong in spirit, clear in mind, and resilient in body. This is not denial of reality, but embracing the deeper reality that God created us for life, not decay. Cayce taught that every act of kindness, every prayer of faith, every choice to live in balance brings you closer to that reality. And the reward is not only longer life, but better life, a life filled with meaning, service, and peace. This is the real secret, the key to rejuvenation and longevity that so few truly know. And now you know it too. The question is, will you apply it? If this message has spoken to you, I invite you to take a step of faith today. Begin small, choose one habit, one thought, one act of love, and let it become your foundation. Over time, you will see the difference not only in your body, but in your entire life. Edgar Cayce believed that when we live as temples of the Spirit, God Himself renews us daily. That promise is not reserved for a chosen few. It is for anyone who is willing to walk in faith. And as you reflect on this teaching, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what longevity and renewal mean to you, and I will personally mark your comment with a heart to show that I read it and value your presence here. Together, we are building a community of faith, hope, and renewal. And if you found value in this message, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more content that reveals the wisdom of Edgar Cayce and the eternal truths that can change your life.
In 1932, inside a modest house in Virginia Beach, a group of ordinary people witnessed something extraordinary. Edgar Cayce, the man later known as the Sleeping Prophet, entered one of his deep trances and spoke words that would change how many understood the bond between Jesus and the concept of Christ consciousness. What he revealed was not a vague idea or poetic metaphor, but a vision that connected human destiny with a universal presence. According to Cayce, the life of Jesus was not only a historical event, but the embodiment of a vibration available to every soul willing to awaken. This revelation was shocking for the audience, because it broke the common division between what they thought was only reserved for one figure in history and what Cayce insisted could live inside each human being. It was during this very session that he described Christ consciousness not as an abstract belief, but as a living force capable of healing, transforming, and guiding. This is where our journey begins, uncovering the hidden bond between Jesus and the awakening of divine awareness within each of us. And if this discovery already resonates with you, pause for a moment, subscribe, like, and share this message, because in the next minutes we will expose details from Cayce's documented sessions that most people have never heard before. Details that could change the way you see your own spiritual path. When we look at the life of Edgar Cayce, born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1877, it becomes clear that his mission went far beyond diagnosing illnesses or predicting world events. His greatest contribution was pointing humanity back to the same source that gave strength to Jesus, the interconnection with God through Christ consciousness. During the Great Depression, families who had lost everything came to Cayce not just for physical healing but for hope. Many reported that his words carried a presence that seemed to calm despair. This is where the thread between Jesus and Christ consciousness becomes undeniable. Cayce said repeatedly that what Jesus embodied was not limited to one man, but was the perfect model of what every soul could become. He described this state as aligning the human mind with the divine pattern, the Christ vibration that exists in every heart. What shocked listeners was his insistence that the miracles of Jesus were not meant to remain unattainable wonders, but demonstrations of a law accessible to all. And as you will soon discover, Cayce gave practical steps on how to touch this reality, even in times of war, loss, or confusion. But here is what nobody expected. In one of his most impactful readings during the early 1930s, Cayce was asked about the difference between Jesus and Christ. He paused in trance and delivered a message that silenced the entire room. He said, "Jesus became the Christ." For many, this sentence overturned centuries of theological debate. What Cayce meant was profound. Jesus, the man from Nazareth, fully aligned his will with the eternal presence of God, and in doing so, embodied the Christ consciousness available to all. This was not about worshiping a distant figure, but about realizing the same potential within ourselves. The implications were revolutionary. If Cayce was correct, then every soul carries within it the seed of the Christ. The difference lies in whether we nurture it or let it remain dormant. For his audience, many living through the crushing weight of the Depression, these words did not just sound mystical. They were practical. They offered hope that even in their darkest hour, the same light that lived in Jesus could guide them forward. And as you keep listening, you will discover how Cayce connected this truth not only to faith, but also to the science of the soul. During World War II, as young men were being drafted and uncertainty consumed families, Cayce's sessions became even more vital. Mothers would bring photographs of their sons, desperate for answers. In trance, Cayce often reminded them that the ultimate protection was aligning with the Christ force within. He would explain that Jesus had demonstrated a complete harmony between the body, mind, and spirit, and that when a person reached for this same vibration, fear lost its grip. It was not about escaping suffering, but about finding strength within it. For Cayce, this was the hidden bond. Jesus was the pattern. Christ consciousness was the state, and humanity was the vessel. Every reading pointing to this truth formed a chain that continues to resonate today. In fact, some of his most moving words emphasized that each soul's destiny was to eventually become one with this consciousness. Imagine hearing that in an era when churches often preached separation and unworthiness. No wonder people left his sessions in tears, not of despair, but of a strange new confidence that they were more than they had ever believed. As the years passed, the more Cayce spoke, the clearer his message became. Jesus was not only a savior to be worshipped, but also the living example of what humanity could achieve by awakening the Christ within. In one of his documented sessions in Virginia Beach, he told a group that the same spirit which raised Jesus from the tomb also rests in every soul waiting to be recognized. For many who sat in his living room, this was not only a revelation, but a challenge. It required people to see themselves not as helpless sinners, but as co-creators with God. This was radical, especially in a time when most Christians were taught that the divine was distant. Cayce turned this teaching upside down. He said the kingdom of heaven is not far away but within. This was the cornerstone of his interpretation of Christ consciousness. He explained that the life of Jesus was proof that human beings could rise above fear, disease, and even death by aligning their will with divine purpose. To Cayce, Jesus was the first to fully live out this pattern, but not the last. What came next shocked even his most loyal supporters. When asked how one could enter this Christ vibration, Cayce gave very specific instructions. Prayer combined with purposeful action. He warned that prayer without application remained empty, and action without connection to spirit was blind. The true bond with Christ consciousness, he said, was forged when thought, feeling, and deed all moved in harmony with God's will. This was not theology. It was a spiritual science. He insisted that every choice in daily life could either awaken or suffocate this inner light. During one powerful session that witnesses recalled decades later, Cayce described how even the smallest act of kindness carried the seed of divine transformation. It echoed the words of Jesus himself, "As you do unto the least of these, you do unto me." Here, Cayce revealed that Jesus was not pointing to himself, but to the eternal Christ working through every gesture of love. This message was both humbling and empowering, because it shifted responsibility from waiting for miracles to becoming vessels of them. And here is where the story takes a dramatic turn. Many skeptics accused Cayce of heresy, saying that his interpretation diminished the uniqueness of Jesus. But Cayce never denied the majesty of Christ. In fact, he elevated it. He explained that Jesus, by perfectly embodying the Christ force, became the model for all souls. The difference between humanity and Jesus was not one of kind, but of degree. While most live clouded by ego, fear, and separation, Jesus lived in complete unity with God. This was why he could heal with a word, calm storms, and forgive his enemies even in death. Cayce urged his listeners not to see these acts as unattainable legends, but as previews of humanity's own destiny. This perspective was shocking, but it gave countless people the courage to reimagine their lives. If Jesus showed what was possible, then the goal of life was not just survival, but transformation into living channels of Christ consciousness. Cayce's words still echo. The Christ is the pattern. Jesus is the way. During the post-war years, as soldiers returned broken in body and spirit, Cayce's legacy became a lifeline for many seeking healing. Families who studied his readings discovered that the hidden bond between Jesus and Christ consciousness was not just mystical, it was practical. For example, he described how meditation could attune the mind to the divine vibration, allowing people to receive guidance in times of confusion. He compared it to tuning a radio. If the frequency was set correctly, the message of the Spirit would come through clearly. This teaching carried enormous weight in America's cultural climate of the 1940s and 1950s, when fear of the future was strong. To sit in silence, center the heart on Christ, and listen was revolutionary. Cayce insisted that Jesus himself modeled this in his nights of prayer. withdrawing from the crowds to connect with the Father. Those who followed these practices often testified to profound changes in their lives: renewed health, restored marriages, and fresh courage to face challenges. These were not abstract theories, but lived transformations. Yes, Cayce did not stop at describing Christ consciousness as an inner state of peace or moral guidance. He went further, saying it was the very key to unlocking humanity's destiny across time and space. In one of his most moving sessions recorded in Virginia Beach, he explained that every soul, before entering the earth, already carried the memory of oneness with God. But when incarnated, the weight of material life, the distractions of desire, and the illusions of separation made people forget. The role of Jesus, according to Cayce, was to remind humanity of its forgotten origin and destiny. This is where the hidden bond became cosmic. Christ consciousness was not simply personal salvation. It was alignment with the creative force of the universe itself. Cayce described this as entering the pattern that shaped the stars, the oceans, and the breath of every living being. The thought that the same energy that moved through Jesus could move through ordinary people was overwhelming, and many left his sessions in stunned silence, realizing their lives were far more significant than they had ever imagined. He explained further that this bond was like a thread woven through every incarnation of the soul. Cayce often referred to the records of the soul, the Akashic records, as proof that the journey was not random. Each lifetime, each struggle, each lesson was a step toward awakening the Christ within. He warned, however, that ignoring this inner call led to cycles of suffering and confusion. Yet, even in failure, the divine seed remained intact. One of his most remembered statements was, "No soul is ever lost." To Cayce, Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection were not only events in history, but cosmic symbols of this truth: that the soul may fall into darkness, but the Christ vibration always calls it back to life. This perspective gave listeners both hope and responsibility. Hope, because no mistake was final. Responsibility, because every choice carried eternal weight. The hidden bond was not passive belief. It was active participation in the unfolding of divine consciousness on earth. But here is what nobody expected Cayce to say. In a session during the early 1940s, when war had torn families apart, he revealed that the Christ vibration was not bound to religion or nationality. It was universal. He said the Spirit of Christ spoke to every culture in a language they could understand, whether through prophets, sages, or inner experiences. Yet Jesus of Nazareth remained the clearest embodiment of this force in history. For Americans at the time, many of whom had been taught that salvation belonged only to their creed, this was a staggering revelation. It expanded the vision of Christ from a church doctrine to a cosmic reality. Cayce insisted that clinging to dogma while ignoring the living presence of Christ within would lead to emptiness. True connection meant living as Jesus lived, forgiving, healing, serving, and surrendering to God's will. This message was not popular with everyone, but it resonated deeply with those searching for answers beyond tradition. And even now, his words invite us to ask, are we living as vessels of Christ, or as spectators of a story we claim to believe? Cayce often returned to practical instruction, making it clear that Christ consciousness was not awakened by belief alone, but through practice. Meditation, service to others, and forgiveness were constant themes in his readings. He reminded people that Jesus did not separate spiritual truth from daily living. Whether healing the sick, blessing children, or washing the feet of his disciples, Jesus demonstrated that the bond with Christ was active love. Cayce emphasized that to truly connect with this vibration, one had to live it in the smallest details. How you spoke to your neighbor, how you treated your body, how you forgave those who wronged you. He even connected this to health, saying that many illnesses were rooted in spiritual imbalance, and that aligning with the Christ force could bring restoration. These teachings made his sessions feel both mystical and practical, offering not just lofty ideas but clear steps toward transformation. It was this balance that kept people coming back, believing they had found a guide who could connect heaven and earth in a way no one else could. Cayce's vision did not stop at the individual soul. He connected Christ consciousness with the destiny of entire civilizations. During the years of global war and political turmoil, He warned that humanity's survival would depend not on military power or wealth, but on whether people learned to live the pattern of Christ. He explained that the teachings of Jesus were not just moral suggestions, but universal laws, and breaking them would bring consequences as real as gravity. When asked about the future of nations, Cayce often turned the focus back to this hidden bond. A country that lived by selfishness, greed, and violence would collapse under its own weight, while a nation that aligned with Christ-like service and compassion would rise as a light to others. For his American listeners, this was both sobering and inspiring. It meant that their collective destiny was tied to spiritual principles, not only political systems. In many of his post-war readings, Cayce described America's true mission as becoming a land where freedom would be balanced with responsibility to God and neighbor. That, he said, was the Christ vibration applied to history itself. This perspective was not a vague philosophy. It was urgent guidance. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, Cayce often spoke of a coming shift in human consciousness. He described a future where souls would awaken to their spiritual nature in ways never seen before. But he warned that this awakening could come through crisis if humanity refused to learn voluntarily. The hidden bond between Jesus and Christ consciousness, therefore, was not only a key to personal transformation, but the blueprint for humanity's evolution. Cayce saw that Jesus embodied the next stage of human possibility, showing the way forward for all souls. Those who resisted this evolution would remain trapped in cycles of fear and destruction. Those who embraced it would become channels of light, helping usher in a new era. His words carried both gravity and hope, urging listeners to make a choice, to remain in the old world of separation or to step into the new world of unity through Christ. What made Cayce's insights even more extraordinary was how they blended the mystical with the practical. He often explained that awakening Christ consciousness was not about escaping daily life, but transforming it. He gave examples of how business decisions, family relationships, and even the way people ate and rested could either reflect the Christ vibration or move against it. For instance, he once advised a businessman who was obsessed with profit to focus instead on serving others through his work. Within months, the man not only found greater success, but also experienced a sense of peace he had never known. Cayce used such cases to demonstrate that the hidden bond was not confined to church pews or meditation rooms. It was meant for the marketplace, the home, and the battlefield alike. Every act could become sacred if aligned with the Christ within. In this sense, Jesus was not distant history, but the living pattern for how to exist in every era. And yet, Cayce always brought his audience back to one central truth. The bond between Jesus and Christ consciousness was love in action. He explained that while meditation and prayer opened the channel, it was love expressed, sometimes in the simplest ways, that proved the connection was real. He told listeners that when they forgave someone who had deeply hurt them, when they lifted a burden from a stranger, or when they chose compassion over judgment, they were literally embodying the Christ. This was not symbolic. For Cayce, such acts generated a spiritual force that rippled across time, touching unseen realms. He described this as the very energy that sustains creation. To many, these ideas sounded almost too vast to grasp, yet they felt deeply true. And for those who heard him, the challenge was no longer whether Christ consciousness was real, but whether they were willing to live it. Cayce often emphasized that the hidden bond between Jesus and Christ consciousness did not end with earthly life. In fact, he said it became even more important after death. In documented readings preserved at the ARE archives, he described how souls, upon leaving the body, entered realms shaped by their spiritual vibration. Those who had cultivated love, forgiveness, and alignment with the Christ within were drawn to higher planes of light, where peace and clarity awaited them. Others, who clung to selfishness, anger, or fear, remained in denser states until they learned to release those patterns. But here was the extraordinary point. Cayce explained that Christ consciousness was the bridge across all these realms. It was the force that guided souls upward, the same presence Jesus embodied when he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." To Cayce, this was not about dogma, but about spiritual law. The Christ force was the ladder of evolution itself, and Jesus was the demonstration of what awaited every soul that chose to awaken. During one particularly impactful session in the 1930s, Cayce was asked what happens when a person meets death unprepared. His answer stunned the group. He said the soul does not face eternal punishment, but rather a mirror of its own vibration. The presence of Christ is always near, offering the path upward. But many cannot see it until they let go of pride, bitterness, or attachment. He described Jesus not as a judge with a gavel, but as a living light that calls every soul toward healing. This image deeply moved listeners, especially those who had lost loved ones. It meant that no matter how dark the passage, the Christ vibration was waiting on the other side. The hidden bond, therefore, was not only about living well, but about dying into greater life. Cayce reassured people that in moments of passing, the soul is met with compassion, and the invitation to rise into Christ consciousness never ends. This was a message of hope that still resonates today. But here is what startled many of his followers. Cayce often insisted that the journey after death was not passive. Just as on Earth, souls had to choose whether to align with the Christ force. He explained that free will was sacred and continued beyond the grave. Those who resisted love, forgiveness, and unity could remain in lower realms until they were ready. Yet even in those conditions, the presence of Jesus, as the perfect model of Christ consciousness, never abandoned them. To Cayce, this explained why so many traditions spoke of saviors or guides leading souls after death. It was the same reality seen through different cultural lenses. And in his view, the clearest embodiment of that light was Jesus of Nazareth. For Americans facing the grief of wartime losses, this perspective was revolutionary. It gave them not only comfort for the departed, but also a renewed sense of responsibility for their own spiritual choices while alive. What Cayce added next created one of the most profound bridges between earthly life and eternal destiny. He explained that cultivating Christ consciousness here on earth was the preparation for freedom in the afterlife. The daily practices of prayer, meditation, and acts of service were not just moral exercises, but training for the soul's journey. In higher realms, the soul could only remain where its vibration matched. Therefore, every moment of love expressed on earth was an investment in eternal light. This teaching reframed the entire purpose of human existence. Life was not random suffering followed by an uncertain end. It was a classroom where the hidden bond between Jesus and Christ consciousness was tested, strengthened, and proven. The implication was clear. Each soul is on a path toward becoming like Christ, not in worship alone, but in being. And as Cayce said repeatedly, the destiny of every soul is to become one with Him. Cayce's final message about the hidden bond between Jesus and Christ consciousness was not one of fear, but of extraordinary possibility. He believed that if enough people awakened to this reality, humanity could enter a new era. In one of his most cited sessions in Virginia Beach, he declared that the Spirit of Christ was not only calling individuals, but entire nations to rise. He envisioned a time when science, religion, and daily life would no longer be divided, because all would be guided by the same universal pattern. To many, this sounded impossible. Yet Cayce insisted it was not a dream, but an eventual certainty. He explained that evolution was not limited to biology, it was also spiritual. Just as humanity had advanced in knowledge and technology, so too it was destined to advance in consciousness. The figure of Jesus stood as the lighthouse for that destiny, the living evidence that the bond between the human and the divine could be fully realized. In the closing years of his life, Cayce often spoke with urgency, as if time were pressing on humanity. He warned that ignoring this call would bring turmoil, yet he always returned to the same hope. The Christ vibration was stronger than any darkness. He told families who feared the future that the key was not found in political leaders or economic systems, but in the daily choice to embody the Christ within. If enough people did this, war would give way to peace, hatred to compassion, despair to hope. He explained that Jesus' role was to show that love could conquer every shadow, and that Christ consciousness was the means by which that victory spread from one soul to another. In this vision, transformation was not only individual, but collective. Humanity stood at a crossroads, and the choice was clear. Remain trapped in cycles of fear, or awaken to the hidden bond that Jesus revealed with his life. This teaching still matters today. In a world filled with confusion, division, and restlessness, Cayce's words echo across the decades. The Christ is not a distant figure, but the living presence within. The bond between Jesus and Christ consciousness is not locked in the past. It is the invitation of the present. Every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every step taken in service to others is participation in that bond. Cayce believed this was the true meaning of following Jesus, not only admiring him, but becoming like him. For those who feel powerless, this message carries a radical empowerment. The same spirit that lived in Christ dwells in you, and the future of humanity depends on whether we recognize it, nurture it, and live it. That was Cayce's ultimate revelation, preserved in the archives of the ARE, remembered by those who sat in his sessions, and still powerful enough to challenge and inspire today. So the question that remains is not whether Christ consciousness exists. Cayce answered that long ago, through hundreds of readings given in Hopkinsville, Virginia Beach, and beyond. The real question is whether we will live it. Jesus embodied the pattern. Christ consciousness is the invitation, and humanity holds the choice. That is the hidden bond, timeless, unbreakable, and waiting to be awakened in every soul who dares to say yes. And if this message has spoken to you, if it has stirred something within your heart, then join this journey. Like, share, and subscribe so that more seekers can rediscover what Cayce called the most important truth of all, that the Christ is alive within us, and through him, we hold the power to transform our world.